I found out by accident, not from a conversation, not from a confession, from a number that did not make sense. $92,000 does not disappear quietly. It leaves a shape behind, a gap, a record. When I asked about it, my father did not look at me. My mother answered too quickly. My sister said nothing. They told me it had always been gone. They told me I was mistaken. They told me I should have been more responsible. I remember standing there, holding the statement, feeling something settle instead of break. Because in that moment, I understood something simple. They were not confused. They were hoping I would be. And I realized this had been decided long before I ever asked. I used to believe that if something was written down, it meant something. Not just legally, structurally, permanently. My father liked to say that systems existed to protect people from each other. He said it in a calm way, like it was obvious, like gravity. My mother preferred a different version of the same idea. She would say that responsibility was what kept families intact. That trust was not emotional, it was practical. I listened to both of them. I built my life around those sentences without realizing it. I was not the kind of person who argued, not because I agreed with everything, but because I preferred to understand things before speaking. I paid attention. I remembered details. I noticed when something did not align, even if I did not say anything about it. That made me useful in quiet ways. In school, I was consistent. Not exceptional in a way that drew attention, but reliable. Teachers described me as disciplined, focused, the kind of student who did not need to be reminded twice. I learned early that consistency earned a different kind of approval, less visible but more stable. At home, that translated into something else. I did not ask for much. I did not challenge decisions. When my parents explained something, I accepted it as part of a larger structure I trusted them to understand better than I did. That trust was not blind. It was built slowly, through repetition. Through years of seeing them make decisions that appeared to hold. The law school fund was one of those decisions. It was not introduced as a gift. That distinction mattered to my father. He was precise about language. He said it was a commitment tied to effort. If I maintained certain grades, followed a certain path, stayed disciplined, the fund would be there. Not as a reward, but as a continuation of something already in motion. My mother reinforced it differently. She spoke about it in terms of stability, that I would not have to worry about debt the way others did, that I would be able to focus, that it was their responsibility to create that kind of foundation. I did not question either version. I adjusted my expectations around them. I chose courses carefully. I avoided risks that did not align with the path they described. I worked part-time not because I needed the money immediately, but because it felt consistent with the structure I believed in. Discipline, then support. Effort, then continuation. It made sense. My sister existed outside of that structure, not completely, but enough to notice. She was older by 3 years, and our parents spoke to her differently. There was less emphasis on conditions, more on flexibility. Where my path was described in steps, hers was described in possibilities. It was not something we discussed directly. It was just there, observable. She changed directions more than once, started things and left them unfinished. My parents would adjust around her decisions in a way they never did for me, not dramatically, not in a way that invited confrontation, but enough that I understood the difference without needing it explained. I did not resent her for it. Resentment would have required me to believe something was being taken from me. At the time, I did not think that way. I believed the structure I was following was separate, that it was intact regardless of what happened around it. That belief made everything feel stable. Conversations about the fund were infrequent but consistent in tone. When they came up, they sounded the same, measured, certain. My father would mention numbers in passing, not to show them off, but to confirm they existed. My mother would ask about my grades in a way that felt connected to something beyond approval. It created a quiet sense of inevitability, not confidence, not pride, something quieter than that. I organized my life around a future that had already been partially secured. I did not talk about it with friends. I did not use it to define myself. It was simply there, like a foundation you do not think about because it has never shifted. Looking back, I realize how little I verified. I never asked to see full statements. I never requested access. Not because I was uninterested, but because it felt unnecessary. The existence of the system was enough. The details seemed secondary. Trust in our family was not something you checked. It was something you operated within. And for a long time, nothing gave me a reason to think that was a mistake. Not the conversations, not the structure, not the people who built it. Everything held. At least, that is how it looked from where I was standing. The first time something felt off, it was small enough to ignore. It happened in the middle of an ordinary conversation. My mother was asking about my course load for the upcoming semester, and I mentioned I was considering adding an elective. It would not have changed anything significant, just shifted the balance slightly. She paused longer than usual before responding, not long enough to draw attention, just enough to register. Then she said, "You should be careful about adding anything unnecessary right now." The phrasing stayed with me. Unnecessary. It was not how she usually spoke about my decisions. There was always a tone of encouragement attached to anything that aligned with long-term planning. Even when she suggested caution, it was framed as optimization, not restriction. I did not question her in the moment. I nodded and said I would think about it. The conversation moved on, but something about the pause lingered. A few days later, my father mentioned the fund for the first time in months. It came up indirectly in a conversation about tuition increases. He said costs were rising faster than expected, but his tone was flat, informational. I asked, "Are we still on track?" It was a simple question, one I had asked before in different forms. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he adjusted something on the table in front of him, a stack of papers that did not need adjusting. Then he said, "You should focus on what you can control." It was not an answer. I recognized that, but I did not press further. That had always been the pattern. If something was not answered directly, it usually meant the answer would come later, in a more complete form. I accepted that. At the time, it felt like patience. Looking back, it was something else. My sister started visiting more often around that period, not in a noticeable way at first, just an increase in frequency that became clear only when I thought about it afterward. She would come by in the evenings, sometimes unannounced, stay longer than usual. Conversations with my parents would shift when she was there. They were not secretive, but they were contained. Topics changed when I entered the room. Not abruptly, smoothly, enough that it could be explained as coincidence. I told myself it was. There were other small things. My mother began asking more specific questions about my expenses. Not general check-ins, but detailed ones. How much I was spending on books, whether I was budgeting properly, if I had considered reducing certain costs. It felt out of place. She had always emphasized planning, but not in a way that suggested concern. This felt different, narrower. As if something had changed and I was being adjusted around it. I responded carefully, provided clear answers, showed her my records when she asked. Everything aligned. There was nothing in my behavior that required correction. She still seemed unsettled. I noticed it, but I did not name it. One evening, I overheard part of a conversation between my parents in the kitchen. I was not trying to listen. I had come downstairs for water, and their voices carried through the hallway. We agreed it was temporary. my mother was saying. My father responded quietly. I could not hear the exact words, only the tone. Controlled, low, then my mother again, sharper this time. That was before. I stepped back before they noticed I was there. It was not a full conversation, not enough to understand anything clearly. But it introduced something I could not place. Temporary, before what? I did not ask. That became a pattern. I noticed things, then chose not to follow them. It felt like maintaining stability, like respecting boundaries that were not explicitly defined but understood. At the time, I believed that if something important had changed, they would tell me. That assumption remained intact, even as small inconsistencies continued to appear. My sister mentioned a trip she was planning. Nothing extravagant, but more than she would have considered before. When I asked about it, she said she had figured some things out financially. She smiled when she said it, not openly. Just slightly. I nodded. I did not ask for details. It was not my place. That is what I told myself. Everything still functioned on the surface. Conversations happened. Plans were discussed. Nothing collapsed or revealed itself in a way that demanded attention. But there was a shift in tone, subtle, controlled, like a structure that had not moved but no longer felt as solid when you stood on it. I continued with my routine, classes, work, planning. Outwardly, nothing changed. Internally, something had started to separate. Not enough to break trust, just enough to make it feel conditional. And I did not yet understand why. The first time I saw something that could not be explained, it was not dramatic. It was a date. A single line on a document that did not align with anything I had been told. I had gone to the bank to ask a routine question about my personal account. It was not related to the fund. At least, that is what I told myself when I decided to go in person instead of checking online. There was no urgency, just a quiet sense that I needed to see something directly. The branch was nearly empty. The kind of silence that makes small movements feel louder than they are. I spoke with a clerk I did not recognize. He was polite in a practiced way, moving through the process without hesitation. At the end of the conversation, I asked, carefully, if there were any linked accounts under my name connected to educational funds. It was a neutral question. He paused, then typed something into his system. There was one, he said, but it was closed. I did not react immediately. Closed. That word carried more finality than I expected. When? I asked. He turned the screen slightly toward himself, scanning. 8 years ago. I remember the exact way he said it, without emphasis. Without awareness of what it meant. 8 years ago, I did not correct him. I did not explain that the fund was supposed to exist now, not in the past. I simply nodded as if the information matched something I already knew. Do you know why it was closed? I asked. He shook his head. I can request records, but it might take some time. That's fine, I said. I left the bank with nothing in my hands, no documents, no confirmations, just a timeline that did not fit. 8 years ago, I was still in school. The fund had been discussed after that, repeatedly, calmly, as if it were active, as if it had never changed. I walked home slowly. Not because I needed time to process, but because I did not want to arrive with questions I was not ready to ask. That evening, my sister came over. She sat at the table with my parents, speaking in a tone that suggested familiarity, not urgency. I joined them a few minutes later. No one acknowledged anything unusual. I watched them instead. My father spoke about something unrelated, work, I think. My mother responded with interest that felt slightly forced. My sister listened, then added small comments that did not change the direction of the conversation. It was ordinary, deliberately so. At one point, my sister reached for her bag to take out her phone. It slipped slightly, just enough for me to see inside. There was a folder, not labeled in a way I could read clearly, but structured, organized. The kind of folder used for documents that mattered. She noticed me looking, not directly. but her hand moved quickly to close the bag more firmly than necessary. Then she smiled. It was a controlled expression, brief, neutral. The conversation continued. I said nothing. Later that night, I checked old emails, not searching for anything specific at first, just scanning through timelines looking for mentions of the fund, conversations, confirmations, anything that anchored it in reality. There were references, discussions about future planning, mentions of amounts, assurances that everything was on track. But there was nothing recent, nothing within the last few years that confirmed its current status, only echoes of something that had already been established. I went back further, 8 years, there it was, a brief exchange between my parents, not sent to me but included in a forwarded chain about something else. At the time, I had ignored it. It had not seemed relevant. Now it did. "We'll move it for now," my father had written. My mother's reply came a few hours later. "Just make sure it's temporary." Temporary. The same word I had overheard in the kitchen. I read the exchange again. There was no mention of where the money was going, no explanation of why, just an assumption that it would return. I closed the email. The room felt the same. Nothing had changed physically. The same walls, the same quiet. But the structure I had trusted was no longer abstract. It had a timeline. A decision point. A moment where something was moved and never acknowledged again. I did not confront them, not yet. Because for the first time, I understood that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a sequence, and I had only just found the beginning. I did not plan the conversation. It happened because there was no longer a way to avoid it without pretending I had not seen what I had seen. The timing was ordinary. Dinner. The same table. The same arrangement of plates and quiet conversation that had always made things feel structured, predictable. I waited until the conversation slowed, not stopped, just softened enough that a question would not feel like an interruption. "I went to the bank today," I said. No one reacted immediately. My father continued cutting his food. My mother looked up briefly, then back down. My sister did not move. "I asked about the education fund," I added. That changed something, not visibly. Not in a way that would stand out to anyone not paying attention, but I was paying attention. My father's hand paused for a fraction of a second, then continued slower. My mother set her fork down carefully. My sister leaned back slightly in her chair. "What did they say?" my mother asked. Her tone was controlled, even. "They said it was closed," I said, 8 years ago. Silence settled over the table, not heavy, not dramatic, just still. My father spoke first. "That doesn't sound right." He did not look at me when he said it. "It's what they told me," I replied. "There must be some confusion," my mother said quickly. "Banks make mistakes all the time." Her response came too easily, as if it had been prepared. I nodded once. "I can request the records." "That's not necessary," my father said. This time he looked at me. His expression was calm, firm. "We've managed everything properly," he continued. "You don't need to worry about it." The phrasing was familiar. "You don't need to worry." It was something he had said throughout my life in situations where I had no reason to question him. This felt different. "I'm not worried," I said. "I just want to understand the timeline." "There is no timeline," my sister said. Her voice was quieter than usual but steady. I turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" I asked. She held my gaze for a moment, then looked away. "I mean you're overcomplicating something simple," she said. "The fund was never as fixed as you're making it sound." That was new, not the tone, the statement. "It was always discussed as a long-term plan," I said carefully, "not something that could just disappear." "It didn't disappear," my mother said. "Things were adjusted." "Adjusted how?" Another pause. My father exhaled slowly. "We made decisions based on what the family needed at the time," he said. "You were younger. You didn't need to be involved in that." The sentence was structured to sound reasonable. It almost worked. "What decisions?" I asked. My mother shook her head slightly. "This is not something you should be focusing on right now," she said. "You have your studies, your responsibilities." "I am focusing on them," I said. "That's why this matters." My sister let out a quiet breath. "You're making this into something it's not," she said. "There's no issue here." I looked at her, then back at my parents. The same pattern repeated: deflection, minimization, redirection. No one denied that something had happened, but no one defined it either. "So the account was closed," I said, "and the money was moved." "That's a very simplified way of putting it," my father replied. "Then what's the accurate way?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying me in a way that felt less like concern and more like evaluation. "You're approaching this with the wrong mindset," he said. "This isn't a transaction you need to audit. It's a family decision." The word family was placed carefully, as if it should resolve the question on its own. "I'm part of that family," I said. "Yes," my mother said, "and we've always done what's best for everyone." The sentence landed with quiet certainty, not aggressive, final. I felt something shift then, not outwardly. I did not raise my voice. I did not push harder. But internally, something aligned. Every answer had avoided the question. Every explanation had removed detail. Every response had positioned me as the one misunderstanding something that had never been clearly stated. I recognized the pattern, not as confusion, as control. "I'll request the records," I said again. This time, no one told me it wasn't necessary, but no one agreed either. The conversation moved on after that. Gradually, deliberately, topics shifted. Voices returned to their usual tone. If someone had walked in at that moment, they would not have noticed anything unusual. Dinner ended the way it always did. Plates cleared, chairs moved back quietly. No confrontation, no resolution, just a conversation that had been redirected until it no longer existed. Later that night, my mother knocked on my door. "You're overthinking this," she said softly. Her tone was different now, gentler, almost reassuring. "We've always taken care of things," she continued. "You need to trust that." I looked at her. For a moment, I considered agreeing. Letting the conversation dissolve completely, returning to the version of events that required less effort to maintain. Instead, I nodded once. Not in agreement, just acknowledgement. She seemed satisfied with that. When she left, the room felt quieter than before. Not empty, just settled. Because for the first time, I understood that asking directly would not lead to clarity. It would only produce better versions of the same answers. And whatever had happened 8 years ago, they were not going to explain it. Not if I kept asking the way they expected me to. I did not ask them again. Not because I had accepted their answers, but because I understood the limits of those conversations. There was a structure to the way they responded, one that redirected, softened, and removed anything that could be confirmed. If I wanted clarity, it would not come from them. It would come from something that did not adjust itself to protect them. So I went back to the bank. This time I asked for the records formally. There was paperwork, identification, a process that moved slower than I expected, but with a different kind of certainty. Systems do not hesitate in the same way people do. They either produce something or they do not. A few days later, I received a call. The records were ready. I went in during the afternoon when the branch was quieter. The same clerk was there. He recognized me, though he did not mention our previous conversation. He simply retrieved a folder and placed it in front of me. "Everything we could find is in here," he said. I thanked him and sat down at a small desk near the window. For a moment, I did not open it, not out of hesitation, out of recognition, that whatever was inside would not require interpretation. It would be clear. I opened the folder. The first page confirmed what I already knew. Account closure, 8 years ago. No ambiguity, no alternative explanation. The next pages filled in the rest. transfers, dates, amounts. A sequence that moved quickly once it began. The fund had not disappeared. It had been moved in full, not in small withdrawals or gradual adjustments, but in a single, deliberate action. The entire amount transferred out within a narrow window of time. I followed the record carefully. The destination account was listed, not under my name, under my sister, S. I did not react immediately. I continued reading. There were additional entries, smaller transfers that followed over the next few months, supporting movements, adjustments that reinforced the initial decision. It was structured, planned, not temporary. I reached the final page and closed the folder. The room remained quiet, the same stillness as before. Nothing had changed outside of the information in front of me. The clerk glanced in my direction once, then looked away. No one asked me anything. No one needed to. I left the bank with copies this time. Not many, just enough to confirm what I had seen. At home, I placed them on my desk and sat down. I did not review them again immediately. I did not need to. The sequence was already clear in my mind. 8 years ago, the fund had been moved, not lost, not adjusted, given. The language my parents had used no longer applied. There had been no temporary measure, no misunderstanding. Only a decision that had been maintained through silence. That evening, my sister called. It was unexpected. We did not speak often outside of family gatherings. I answered. Her voice was steady. "I heard you've been asking about the fund," she said, not accusatory, not defensive, just aware. "I went to the bank," I replied, a pause, then "You shouldn't have done that." The statement was quiet but direct. "I wanted accurate information," I said. "You already had information," she replied. "You just didn't like it." I considered that. It was not entirely incorrect. "I had explanations," I said, "not records." Another pause, longer this time. "I didn't ask for it," she said finally. The sentence came without context, but it carried weight. "I know," I said, "because I did. The documents showed authorization, signatures, not hers, our parents." She exhaled softly. "It wasn't supposed to be permanent," she added. The same word again. Temporary. I looked at the papers on my desk, the sequence of transfers, the absence of any return. "It was," I said. She did not respond immediately. "I used it," she said after a moment. "At first, it was just to cover something short-term, then things changed." Her voice did not break. It remained controlled, measured, as if she had repeated this explanation to herself many times. "They told me it would be replaced," she continued, "that it wouldn't affect you." I listened, not interrupting, not questioning, because the details did not alter the outcome. "They said you wouldn't need it right away," she said, "that there was time." Time, 8 years of it. "And now?" I asked. The question was simple, open. She hesitated. "I don't have it," she said. There was no elaboration, no justification beyond that. "I understand," I replied, and I did, not in the way she might have expected, but in a way that no longer required clarification. The call ended without resolution. No agreement. No plan to fix anything, just an acknowledgement of what had already been confirmed. I sat there for a long time after, not thinking about what I would say to my parents, not considering confrontation, only recognizing that the truth had moved beyond them. It existed now in records, in timelines, in decisions that could not be reframed. And for the first time, I understood something with complete clarity. They had not expected me to look, not because they believed I trusted them, but because they believed I would continue to. After that call, nothing was said directly, but everything changed, not in a visible way at first. The same routines continued, meals, conversations, small check-ins that sounded unchanged if you were not listening closely. But I was, and the tone had shifted. My parents had always spoken with a certain level of control. Even in disagreement, there was structure, a sense that things remained within defined boundaries. That structure began to tighten. My mother started asking where I was going more often. Not in a concerned way, but with a kind of precision that suggested she was tracking something rather than understanding it. "What time will you be back?" she would ask, even when my schedule had not changed. My father became quieter, not withdrawn, but more selective with his words. Conversations that used to expand now closed quickly. If I asked anything that required explanation, he would respond with something short, then redirect. It was subtle, but it was consistent. They knew, not necessarily what I had seen, but enough to recognize that something had shifted. My sister stopped visiting, completely. At first, it seemed like coincidence, a busy schedule, other commitments. But weeks passed, and there was no mention of her coming by, no casual references, no expectation that she might appear unannounced the way she used to. Her absence became its own kind of presence. One evening, my mother mentioned her briefly. "She's dealing with some things right now," she said. The phrasing was vague. I nodded. I did not ask what things, because I already understood the general shape of it. Financial pressure does not disappear, it accumulates, it reshapes decisions, it narrows options. And when it reaches a certain point, it begins to affect everything around it. That pressure had started to surface. Not directly. Through small details. My parents began discussing expenses more openly, but not with me. I would hear fragments of conversations, lowered voices, controlled tones, numbers mentioned and then quickly dismissed. "We can manage for now," my father said once. "For now," my mother repeated. The same language, temporary, always temporary. I started noticing changes in the house, minor adjustments, delayed repairs. Things that would have been handled immediately before were now postponed. Not ignored, just deferred. It was not instability, but it was not the same stability I had grown up with. One afternoon, I received an email from the university, a routine notification about tuition deadlines. There was nothing unusual in it, except that it required confirmation of funding, not immediately, just a standard verification. I read it twice, then closed it. That evening, I brought it up. "I received a notice about tuition confirmation," I said. We were in the living room. My father was reading. My mother was organizing something at the table. "What kind of confirmation?" she asked without looking up. "Proof of funding," I said. "It's standard." My father lowered his paper slightly. "You won't have any issues with that," he said. The confidence in his voice was immediate, practiced. "Do you want me to handle it?" he added. The offer was quick, too quick. "I can take care of it," I said. "It's better if I do," he replied, a small pause. "I'd like to see the documentation," I said. The room became still, not silent, just contained. "There's no need for that," my mother said. "We've already arranged everything." "That's fine," I said. "I still need to submit it." "We'll provide what's necessary," my father said. The phrasing was deliberate, controlled. I nodded once. "I've already requested official records," I said. It was the first time I had said that out loud. Not as an accusation, just a statement. My father's expression did not change, but something in his posture did. A slight shift. As if he had been expecting that possibility, but not confirmation. "When?" he asked. "A few days ago." "And what exactly did you request?" "Account history." The words settled between us. My mother stopped moving, not abruptly, gradually, as if finishing a motion that no longer had purpose. "That wasn't necessary," she said quietly. "I wanted accuracy," I replied. "We've given you accurate information," she said. I did not respond immediately, because we both knew that was not true. Not in a way that could be defended with details. "I'll need to submit what they provide," I said. "That depends on what they provide," my father replied. His tone was still calm, but there was something else under it now. Not anger, control, maintained but strained. I looked at him. "For the university," I said, "it doesn't depend." Another pause, longer this time. My mother sat down slowly. "You're creating complications where there aren't any," she said. I'm following their process, I replied. My father folded his paper and set it aside. Let us be clear, he said. Whatever you think you found, you're interpreting it without full context. I held his gaze. Then give me the context. He did not answer, not immediately, because there was no version of that explanation that would align with the records, and we both understood that. The conversation did not escalate, no raised voices, no direct confrontation, just a tightening. A recognition that the situation had moved beyond what could be managed through explanation alone. That night, I submitted the request to the university, not with assumptions, not with accusations, only with documents, records, timelines. Systems do not argue, they process. And for the first time, I allowed something outside the family to see what had been kept inside it. I did not know what would happen next, but I understood one thing clearly. Whatever control they had maintained for 8 years, it no longer extended beyond this house. After I submitted the documents, I stopped trying to predict outcomes. Not because the situation had resolved, but because it had moved into a space where prediction was no longer useful. The process was no longer contained within conversations or explanations. It was being handled elsewhere now, by systems that did not rely on tone or timing. That created a different kind of quiet. At home, nothing was addressed directly, but the absence of discussion became its own form of acknowledgement. My parents did not ask what I had submitted. They did not request copies. They did not attempt to clarify anything further. The subject, as far as spoken language was concerned, no longer existed, but it was present in everything else. My mother became more careful around me, not distant, not cold, just measured. As if every sentence was being evaluated before it was spoken. Conversations that once felt automatic now had a slight delay, a fraction of a second where something was being considered and then adjusted. My father returned to his routines, but with less ease. He spent more time reviewing documents at the table, though I never saw what they were. When I entered the room, he would continue reading, but his attention was no longer fully on the page. It was on me, not openly. Just enough to register. We coexisted in the same space, maintaining a version of normal that no longer had structure behind it. My sister did not call again. Her silence felt intentional, not avoidance exactly, more like an understanding that there was nothing left to explain that would change anything. I did not reach out to her because there was no question left to ask. The truth had already settled. What remained was not discovery, it was decision. I thought about confronting them again. Not in the way I had before with questions, but with clarity, with the records in front of them, with timelines that could not be redirected or softened. I imagined placing the documents on the table the same way the bank clerk had placed them in front of me, letting the sequence speak for itself. But every time I considered it, I stopped. Not out of hesitation, out of recognition. I already knew what they would say, not the exact words, but the structure, context, necessity, family. Temporary, they would not deny the documents. They would reinterpret them. And in doing so, they would attempt to return the situation to something manageable. Something that could be absorbed back into the same pattern of controlled explanations. I understood then that confrontation would not create resolution. It would only extend the process. So I chose not to do it. That choice did not feel like strength. It felt like removal. A step back from something I had been part of without fully seeing it. I started making small adjustments. Not announcements, not statements, just changes. I handled my own administrative processes without involving them. Communication with the university, financial planning, future steps, everything moved through me directly. When my mother asked if I needed help with anything, I said no, not sharply, just clearly. When my father offered to review something, I told him it was already taken care of. There was no argument, but there was a shift, subtle but irreversible. I was no longer operating within the structure they had defined, and they could see that. One evening, my mother sat down across from me. "You've been distant," she said. Her tone was soft, careful. "I've been focused," I replied. She nodded slightly. "That's not what I mean." I waited. She folded her hands together, looking at them instead of at me. "We've always tried to do what's best," she said, "even if it doesn't always look that way." The sentence was familiar. It had been used before in different contexts, as a way of closing conversations without resolving them. "I understand," I said, and I did, not in the way she intended, but in a way that no longer required her explanation. She looked up then, searching for something in my expression. I kept it neutral. Calm. After a moment, she nodded again and stood up. The conversation ended there, not because it was complete, but because there was nothing left to continue. That was the point I recognized it fully, not just what had happened, but what it meant. The fund had not just been taken. The truth had been managed, maintained, adjusted over time to remain just out of reach of direct confirmation. And when I finally reached it, the response was not correction. It was containment. That realization did not create anger. It created distance, a kind that does not announce itself. It simply removes participation. I did not stop being present. I did not leave. But I stopped engaging with anything that required me to accept their version of events. That was the cost. Not confrontation, not collapse, just a quiet separation that could not be reversed. And once it settled, there was no reason to go back. The response from the university came 2 weeks later. It was not urgent, not marked as critical, just a formal message structured in the same neutral language they used for everything else. They had reviewed the submitted documentation. They required clarification, not from me, from the source of the funds. I read the message once, then again more slowly. There was no accusation in it, no suggestion of wrongdoing, just a request for verification that could not be fulfilled with what had been provided. Because what had been provided did not support the claim that the fund still existed. That was the point where the situation moved beyond interpretation. The documents had done what they were designed to do. They had removed ambiguity. That evening, I left the message open on my laptop. I did not bring it to them immediately. I waited until we were all in the same room, not for impact, for clarity. My father was at the table again, reviewing papers that looked similar to the ones he had been reading for weeks. My mother was in the kitchen, the sound of dishes moving, controlled and repetitive. I sat down and turned the screen toward him. "They need confirmation," I said. He looked at the screen without moving closer. For a moment, he did not react. Then he leaned forward slightly, reading. My mother stopped what she was doing. "Confirmation of what?" she asked. "The source of the fund," I said. My father continued reading. The silence extended longer than usual, not empty, weighted. "They're asking for documentation we already have," my mother said. Her tone carried the same controlled certainty. I did not respond. My father closed the laptop slowly. "That won't be necessary," he said. The statement was calm, final. "It is," I replied. "They don't need the full history," he said. "Just a confirmation." "They're asking for it," I said. Another pause. My mother stepped closer. "There must be a way to simplify this," she said. "These systems don't always require everything they ask for." I looked at her. "They do when something doesn't match." The sentence settled between us. My father exhaled quietly. Then, for the first time, he did not redirect. He did not reframe. He did not offer an alternative explanation. Instead, he said, "What exactly did you submit?" "The account records," I said. "Closure date, transfer history." My mother's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "You shouldn't have included all of that," she said. The words came out softer than before, not defensive, concerned. "I submitted what they asked for," I replied. "That creates unnecessary complications," she said. I held her gaze. "It creates accuracy." The room fell quiet again. This time, there was no attempt to fill it immediately, because there was nothing left that could adjust the situation. The system had already processed what it was given, and it had responded accordingly. A few days later, the follow-up came, not to me, to them. A formal request for clarification, verification of the transfer, explanation of the discrepancy. It was no longer contained within our conversations. It existed in records that required response. I did not see the letter, but I saw the effect. My father spent an entire evening at the table, reviewing documents with a level of focus I had not seen before. Not controlled. Urgent. My mother made calls in the other room, her voice low but strained in a way that could not be hidden completely. My sister came back. Not in the same way as before, she did not stay long. She spoke with them privately, left without acknowledging me, but her presence confirmed what I already understood. This had reached her. The consequences were not immediate. They did not arrive with confrontation or exposure. They appeared gradually, in requests that could not be ignored, in timelines that required explanation, in systems that did not accept temporary as an answer. Weeks passed. The house became quieter, not peaceful, restricted. Conversations were shorter, more deliberate, as if every word now carried weight that could extend beyond the room. No one asked me to intervene. No one requested that I adjust anything, because there was nothing left for me to adjust. I had already done the only thing that mattered. I had provided the record. And once it existed outside of us, it no longer depended on what anyone said. One evening, my father approached me, not at the table, not in a shared space, in the hallway. "We're working through it," he said. His voice was steady, but not controlled in the same way as before. I nodded. "I understand." He looked at me for a moment longer, as if expecting something else, a question, a reaction. There was none. After a second, he nodded back and walked away. That was the first acknowledgement. Not of what had happened, but of what could no longer be contained. The consequences had not been delivered by me. They had emerged from what had been documented, verified, processed, and now they were no longer avoidable. It took 8 years for the truth to surface, and less than 8 weeks for everything around it to change. Not publicly. Not in a way anyone outside the situation would recognize. There were no formal accusations, no visible collapse. No moment where everything was laid out and acknowledged in a single conversation. Just a series of outcomes that settled into place, quietly. The university adjusted its position. My path changed, but it did not stop. I built something separate from what had been promised, not quickly, not easily, but without relying on anything that could be taken or redefined. At home, the structure never returned. It continued in a reduced form. Conversations happened. Meals were shared. But the underlying certainty, the one I had grown up trusting, was gone, replaced by something more careful, more aware. My sister visited again eventually. Less often, shorter stays. We spoke when necessary, nothing more. One evening, years later, my parents asked me to sit down. There was no preparation, no lead-in, just a quiet request. My father spoke first. "We made mistakes," he said. The words were measured, chosen. My mother followed. "We thought we had time to fix it," she added. "We didn't expect." She stopped there, didn't finish the sentence. They were not asking for understanding, not directly. They were asking for something else. Relief, maybe, closure, something that would allow the past to settle into a version that could be lived with. I listened. The same way I had always listened, without interrupting, without correcting. When they finished, the room became still. They looked at me, waiting, not for details, for a response. I considered what they were asking, not in words, in weight. Then I nodded once, not in agreement, not in forgiveness, just acknowledgement. "I understand," I said, and that was all, no confrontation, no resolution. The conversation ended the same way everything else had, quietly. Nothing was restored, nothing was returned, but something had been made clear, and once it was, there was no reason to say anything more.